Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qindong. Leaders from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, are meeting in the Cambodian capital of Phnom Penh to address challenges such as the situation in Myanmar and economic recovery. Will the gathering of leaders deliver answers to deal with these tough challenges? How will they balance ties with big powers, including China and the U.S.? With those questions in mind, I'm glad to be joined today by Teng Jianqun, Director for the Center of Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies, Digby Wren, political analyst and international relations scholar from Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, and Chheang Vannarith, President of Asian Vision Institute based in Cambodia. Welcome to the discussion, gentlemen. Chheang, I will start with you. As this year's theme is addressing challenges together, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, addressed Friday's opening ceremony with a call for vigilance and wisdom in times of economic and geopolitical turmoil. He said, quote, "We are now at the most uncertain juncture. The lives of millions in our region depend on our wisdom and foresight." Tell us, what did he refer to in terms of the challenges facing the region?
Yes, indeed, chairing ASEAN this year is not easy task. It is a huge task for a small state like Cambodia, but we need to be responsible in order to help provide platform for dialogue, consultation, and consensus building to address certain regional and global issues. So one of the key issues here that we're trying to provide solution is a post-COVID-19 social economic recovery. How can we maintain open and inclusive regional integration, supply chains, resilience, and so on, and also to promote trade and investment flow. And the conclusion and enforcement of regional comprehensive economic partnership is one of the key highlights of Cambodia chairmanship this year. Of course, Myanmar issue is high on the agenda. The Foreign Minister have discussed it for several times this year, actually. And Cambodia, as a special envoy, have visited 2 times. Prime Minister Hun Sen himself once early this year. So we try to find a more innovative solution to Myanmar because it's quite disappointed with regards to the outcomes of the ASEAN chairmanship. So Cambodia is committed to continuing its engagement to resolve Myanmar issue. And also there's many other geopolitical storms that Cambodia need to navigate. Geopolitical storm, very complex. The competition between major power and so on. And tomorrow will be East Asia Summit, and the day after tomorrow will be ASEAN Global Dialogue. So the ASEAN Global Dialogue also very important because this is the flagship initiative of Cambodia 10 years ago. When Cambodia was the chair of ASEAN, they organized the first ASEAN Global Dialogue, and this year's second round to invite the UN agencies, the international organizations to come together to discuss with ASEAN leaders and provide solution together. So because ASEAN alone cannot deal with these multiplex, interconnected global issues. So ASEAN need partnership with the regional international actors.
Well, that's right. Chheang, speak of this economic recovery. Obviously, it affects every country in the region, basically every country around the world. So we are seeing strong growth numbers, for ASEAN countries, many economies. So how is the recovery going on, like with Cambodia, for example, and other ASEAN countries?
According to various forecasts, it's quite vibrant in terms of economic recovery, about 5% this year. Cambodia about 5+% to 6% this year and next year. So I think our region is perhaps the most vibrant economic region in the post-COVID recovery. This thanks to the momentum of regional integration, trade investment, and opening up. And of course, the success of fighting against the COVID-19 through vaccination and so on. So this is a kind of a very dynamic region in the world that can attract also foreign direct investment to this region as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Digby, speak of this, vibrancy of the economy. Usually, it's China, ASEAN, Japan, South Korea, basically East Asia, Southeast Asia, they are becoming more and more important in terms of the global economic recovery. For example, if you look at the China-ASEAN trade, last year it was valued at 878.2 billion US dollars, and the trade between the two sides, for the first 9 months, for example, you do see double-digit growth in the two-way trade, and some are predicting bilateral trade for this year reaching $1 trillion. That's a big number. How likely is it?
Oh, I think it's probably very likely, unless something goes wrong in the US and European economies. But other than that, I think there's every chance that that's exactly what's going to happen. Look, this is the most vibrant region. There is no doubt about that. And the Belt and Road, for example, has been a really big catalyst to get that going. And ASEAN and China now have been, I think, for 6 or 7 years, each other's largest trading partners. And I think that the China's input into ASEAN and into other parts of Asia. Japan has also been investing heavily, and South Korea as well. So this is going to propel, and as our previous speaker said, we're looking at something like 5 to 6% growth, and that is in a world that is in super inflation, very high inflation, being exported out of the United States and causing all sorts of grief for everybody. So even with those headwinds, Asia, and especially ASEAN and China, are still able to produce global growth, not just regional growth, but global growth. They're powering the globe, and everybody has to be aware of that. And I think that's going to be one of the major points when Biden arrives tomorrow. President Biden arrives and joins the meetings tomorrow. I think there's going to be, he said that he wasn't going to make any, what did he say? He said he wouldn't be agreeing to any pressure or whatever. But I think he will be being pressured quite a lot to rein in the US economy and to take a more sensible approach to fiscal and monetary policy, because otherwise we're going to see Asia running away with 6% and everybody else going negative.
Mm-hmm. That's a very strong growth. Digby, you mentioned about this Belt and Road Initiative. I think probably people would have pointed to the recent examples. For example, this 1-year-old China-funded railway line, through Laos from western part of China, has already taken 1.7 billion US dollars worth of cargo through this country. And also, if you look at Jakarta, the country's capital city of Indonesia, which is to host the G20, the summit meeting, Jakarta to Bandung, this bullet train, 142 kilometers long. And with this bullet train put into operation, they were going to cut the travel time from 3 hours, 4 hours to 36 minutes. That is a great progress, right?
Yeah.
A boost to economic development.
Well, absolutely. Look, Laos was a completely landlocked country, and now it has a high-speed rail network with freight and passengers into Kunming, and that network is going to expand. Look, highways. Premier Li Keqiang is here in Phnom Penh, opening a brand new expressway down into Sihanoukville, Phnom Penh to Sihanoukville. The port's going to be expanded there, and there's going to be a lot more trade. That's going to be the largest port in the Gulf of Thailand. Very, very important. And there's a fiber optic cable all the way to Hong Kong out of Sihanoukville. There's a new airport being built in Cambodia in Siem Reap, where the Angkor Wat temple is, very famous worldwide, and there are many more projects going ahead. So, this is happening in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in all of the ASEAN countries. So I think this is a really good sign for the future and a very long-term view. And I think, this ASEAN summit, there will be some discussion about standardization, further harmonization, more cooperation in trade, cross-border payment systems, maybe de-dollarization as well, using each other's currencies. That's going to propel further growth.
Mm-hmm. Speak of that, Jianqun, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is in Cambodia, obviously ready to talk to regional leaders there. And it's reportedly that the Chinese side is seeking to upgrade the existing free trade area, trade zone between China and ASEAN countries. It has been 9 or 10 years almost there. And obviously, so 90% of the goods, tariffs are being reduced. So what are we looking at further upgrading this existing agreement here?
Yeah, this is a very important step to continue maintain the momentum of the cooperation in trade between the two sides. I mean, between China and ASEAN. Actually, China would like to share its achievements as proposed by the Road and Belt Initiative. We would like to share our achievements, after at least 40 years development at home, and this time we would like to, share such achievements at this moment. I think such a proposal or such a new agreement to upgrade the trade arrangement will give more and more, driving forces to the future of the trade cooperation between the two sides. At this moment, I'm sure the two sides would like to see such a development, such a cooperation, because the trade, actually has been a stabilizer for the two sides to go ahead, especially when the financial crisis happened in 1997. China at that time was also facing such a pressure in financial crisis, but China gave 100% support to the ASEAN countries, especially Thailand and some other countries. So I think China will continue the cooperation in trade with the ASEAN countries. This is a very important aspect of our cooperation in maintaining peace and stability in this region.
Mm-hmm. And also, can we say, China and ASEAN countries as a part of Asia, both has actually shared a lot of values. For example, that is be patient and also prioritizing trade, investment, economic development. Of course, there are problems, even disputes, for example, between China and some ASEAN countries. But it's really about how to deal with those issues and maintain this sound and strong relationship.
Yeah, I think I've been to at least 8 countries of ASEAN, and I have got impression that all the ASEAN countries would like to have a more balanced, diplomacy or relationship with China, with the United States, with the EU countries, and also with Russia. So this is the best choice because China has increased its cooperation in security, in military, and also initiated several military drills with ASEAN countries. China used to be very cautious in this regard, but this time, in order to maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea, in Southeast Asia, China provide the security, initiative to this region. So I think in future, China will enlarge the cooperation in every aspect with the ASEAN countries and to have shared future with the ASEAN countries.
As important neighbors. Chheang, of course, we have mentioned about China, U.S. Obviously, ASEAN countries see the two powers, two relationship, very important, key to this region. The United States initiated this Indo-Pacific economic framework without China, let's say. So how is it progressing right now?
Well, I think that initiative is rather a political strategic kind of mechanism rather than a pure economic mechanism, because look at the funding, look at the lack of access to the US markets, because most of Southeast Asian countries need to export, so they're looking for markets. So if the US could not offer this market access, so what is the meaning of that kind of economic deal and mechanism? Of course, it may help to contribute to the building of certain rules and standard, for instance, when it comes to transparency or corruption or green environment and so on. But I think the urgent need at this stage is to recover the regional economies through exporting and attracting foreign direct investment into the region, of course. So anyway, if we compare the US initiative with China initiative, China is more attractive economically.
More pragmatic. Chheang, a related question here. Obviously, after this ASEAN summit, ASEAN Plus, and also we have G20 meeting in Indonesia, and then APEC meeting in Thailand. So this is sort of like a Asian summit, or people would say the moment of Asia. What do you make of that?
Yes, this is the time that Asia need to come to the front and provide solutions and take the lead. Because look at different continents, the world is quite a big mess now. So Asia, we still have peace and stability and a vibrant economy. So we have the responsibility to provide solution to the world, to lead the world economy and security to a new level. So I think this is a time and the moment for Asia to demonstrate its leadership role.
Digby, so G20 summit meeting in Indonesia is upcoming. Any expectation?
Yes, well, I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure on the G7 countries, and especially on the United States from the others, especially the BRICS nations, to rein in the US and to bring some stability to the global economy. Obviously, ASEAN is going to sort of set that up, but the ASEAN summit and the EAS summit, but and possibly APEC, but the G20 is where I think the global questions are going to be asked. That's basically a financial grouping, and they're going to look at fiscal and monetary policy. And where are they going to look? They're going to look at the United States, and they're going to say to Biden, to President Biden, that the United States has to rein in its policies. It's actually the largest threat to the global economy right now is U.S. fiscal and monetary policy, and because what they do is basically domestic policy, but it affects the globe. And it may well, rising rates on the dollar, emerging economies with dollar-denominated debts are going to have real trouble. That's very problematic, and it's a spiral effect. Where with those economies then won't be able to import or even possibly export because they can't afford to buy the energy inputs or food inputs. So that's going to be a big thing, and I think the BRICS countries are going to have a lot to say about that. And the question is, and I think the G20 has always been a kind of let's say Europe and the US have not been able to really control the G20 formats like they used to control the UN or the G7, for example. So there's a very good chance that the BRICS nations are going to be able to put up a very strong voice and have a more balanced approach from the Americans. I think they're going to have to make concessions. The US will have to make concessions, but we know that the midterm elections are finished. It looks very much like the lower house has gone for the Democrats. They may also lose the Senate, and that's going to turn Biden into a lame duck. And so he's going to have no power. Everything will have to be done by executive decision, and that's going to be very difficult. So whether he can actually do anything. But I think it is definitely going to rein in a little bit of US influence globally, and the G20 might be able to get a turnaround on US policy and get them to be more cooperative.
More cooperative. Let's hope for that. Let's leave there for now and take a look at another major event, the COP27 Climate Change Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. For this part, I also be joined by Wu Changhua, Executive Director at the Professional Association for China's Environment. Welcome to the show, Changhua. We know the conference began on the 6th and will continue until the 18th of this month. So tell us, what are the highlights of the conference in Egypt so far? There's a talk about the loss and damage. What is it?
It's another annual biggest event on climate change, literally trying to gathering all the political leadership, political will, and also resources, hopefully, to be mobilized to address climate change challenges there. As a routine, negotiation always has its own track, so that's why mitigation, adaptation, finance, and collaboration, those are the routine blocks actually within the negotiations. But for this year at COP27, loss and damage, funding for loss and damage has become the defining element in terms of whether we're going to be successful or to what extent we'll be successful coming out of the COP27 there. So that's why if you follow closely, there are a lot of different blocks. On one side, actually putting on the table the numbers based on all kinds of research, scientific research, economist estimates in terms of how much money is going to be needed and what the loss and the damage looks like. In the meantime, there are other initiatives and maybe opposing forces, particularly represented by the United States, against moving forward in terms of setting up an effective international platform to advance that agenda. So President Biden is attending somehow stop by Egypt today, and everyone is looking forward to see what he is going to be conveying the message in terms of what commitments U.S. will be able to make, particularly from financing perspective, because as we all know, the U.S. is historically the largest emitter and also the richest country. It has not delivered or honored its commitments, but hopefully somehow something should have happened. If not, that's going to dramatically threaten the credibility of the international climate governance.
So Changhua, the key is, for the developing countries, loss and damage for the developing countries, and the fund is expected to come from the rich countries. So that's the key issue, and why? Of course, what are the challenges, for example, if there's agreement to be expected?
Well, I think there is a reality that climate change is intensifying, and particularly look at this year and also last year as well. It's literally impacting extreme weather events, the calamities in Asia, in Europe, in North America, in Africa, you name it, everywhere. And we all literally see, the potential, the extent, how much damages actually all those extreme weather events have caused already. So for the developed countries, according to the International Framework Paris Agreements, and even before that, the commitment, by 2020, developed world is supposed to provide up to $100 billion every year to support the developing countries on one side, fighting climate change, in the meantime, actually, to accelerate clean energy transition. That has not been delivered. And of course, last year at Glasgow, there's more money put on the table, pledged, because they had to support the developing countries to adapt. Now, loss and damage for the first time ever in the last 30 years is officially on the agenda, because the loss and damage is just beyond anyone's expectations or capability to manage. It's a life and death situation for many poor developing countries there. If there's not adequate money or mechanism actually to be developed, at least started to be developed, there's no way we're going to be able to collectively fighting climate change. Of course, on one side, the developed countries need to reduce emissions as much as possible, but more and more so, they need to put on the table serious financial resources, a mechanism to support the developing countries, not only to adapt, but also to survive. It's a sort of repatriation sort of situation, which is fair and equitable. That's why climate justice is such a big agenda at the global level. I know it's a complex, but somehow collectively, we have to figure out what the solution should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, speak of the solution, Jianqun, of course, for example, this 100 million commitment from developed world, but actually has failed to deliver, failed to be realized. What are the reasons why the failure to deliver?
I think number one is the lacking of consensus, especially among the developed countries at this moment. Number one is the lacking of cooperation among the major power, the developed countries at this moment to, overcome the climate change challenge at this moment. So I think from my own perspective, the international community, especially the developing countries, should enhance their cooperation, should have a consensus in this regard, because this is a common challenge, not an individual country's challenge at this moment. As our professor just mentioned, we have witnessed the droughts, wildfire, and floods, in recent years. We should cooperate in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Well, Digby, obviously the rich countries are more or less resisting this idea of having a fund for the loss and damage. So what is the consideration why there's such resistance?
Well, because they don't have any money. It's a very simple, short answer. Mm-hmm. If they had surpluses, they were producing surpluses, then they'd be very happy to use the money to influence outcomes in the emerging and developing world. But the situation here is that the global north, Europe and America basically are running very, very, very large debts. They just don't have the money to pay for this, and not only that, they are in fact slowing down the whole process because, for example, oil problems, of course, and so some countries are going back to coal. So how is this going to help COP27, and how is this going to help climate change in general? I think what we're seeing here is that the advanced economies are no longer leading in terms of climate change. Now, I think Europe still has quite a good grasp of climate change, and internally they're introducing lots of reforms and switching to renewables as quickly as they can. China is doing a very good job as well. I think ASEAN has to quicken its pace. But look, the US is definitely a laggard in this one, and not just in terms of their internal domestic policies and pipelines and oil and not switching to renewables and electric vehicles fast enough, but also in terms of the finances. They just don't have the money to support this kind of global program anymore, and it's going to have to be done in a different way.
Mm-hmm. But Digby, question people would ask if you say there's a lack of funds from the rich countries, but we are seeing for example, this support or military support to Ukraine in terms of the conflict, and also is that an issue of priority?
Well, I think this is a really important question where you have this kind of Cold War mentality and certain countries still thinking about national interests and national objectives, foreign policy objectives, being much more important than global cooperation on much larger challenges. Now, I think, and you asked me about the G20 earlier, and I'm going to say to you that I think in the G20 there's going to be a big push to get a peaceful resolution as fast as possible in the Ukraine. This has got to be the way to go. And spending $1 trillion of US taxpayers' money and then exporting inflation to tax the global south to pay for it, because that's really what's happening here, is not the way forward in the future. And I think the G20 is going to give President Biden a rap on the knuckles for this one, exporting inflation and taxing the emerging and developing world to pay for wars that are not necessary and could have been avoided. And so I think US intransigence in relation to energy is a very important thing. And we can see that Saudi Arabia is thinking very, very carefully about switching out of dollar-denominated energy sales. And I think that's going to make the US sit up and take notice very, very quickly.
A world of changes. Changhua, what's your response to this, understanding of all the rich world is also probably shortage of this financial power to support climate change fight?
Well, let me add the other side of the story. Yes, we all recognize many developed economies are sort of in trouble, and as I said, they do not have enough money. But on the other side, recent study assessment says about 54 poorest countries in the world are also at the very high danger of debt default, literally. So they are already heavily indebted. They cannot possibly pay, actually, the debt. And one major reason of that, actually, is because climate change, because of the natural disasters like floods, droughts, heat waves, wildfires, sea level rises, you name it. So developed countries, even morally, ethically, shouldn't just look at themselves, because the scientists are telling us, actually, since 1850, nearly more than half of the emissions, actually, greenhouse emissions, are emitted by developed countries. They need to take their fair share in terms of responsibility. So it's very selfish and irresponsible for US in particular just to push away, just get rid of this sort of responsibility. I do not think a global community would be able to really just so forgiving anymore. That's why the COP27 becomes a make it or break it moment, because without a serious negotiation of the financing mechanism, particularly around the loss of damage, there's not going to be such a global effort to fight climate change.
Right. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.